For centuries, it was believed that humans were the only organisms capable of making and using tools. It was what separated us from the animals. That, and our ability to comprehensively database celebrities' feet. Of course, now we know that there are plenty of animals out there who use tools. However, human tool use is still very unique. You see, many animals use tools, but humans are the only ones who will use them to make simple tasks significantly harder. There's something in us that just doesn't want things to be easy. We make a way to traverse relatively long distances fast and easily, we make a way to stop people falling from great heights, and then we ride one on top of the other to maximise the chance of death when walking would have just been fine. We invent a way to pick debris and dirt off carpets with ease, and then we fuck them, sacrificing blood and body parts to truly test the limits of how well they can clean. Even with the relatively simple tasks of biking and cleaning, we want to make sure they're a challenge. In Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy, we're going one step further, taking an already difficult task and making it even harder. Climbing a mountain is no mean feat, but in this game you do so while sat in a cauldron and using only a sledgehammer. That's even more impressive. Next we'll be performing surgery using only the serrated beak of a slime-covered goose, or trying to hire an uncriticised cool person to keep water clean whilst controlling its flow, using only a berated geek with a grime-covered sluice. You control the sledgehammer with the mouse, and that's it. All movement is done through pushing the hammer into things or hooking it onto an object and pulling yourself up. As you can probably guess, the controls take a bit of getting used to, so at the beginning you'll be falling a lot. But once you finally do get the hang of it, it won't make a shred of difference and you'll fall all the bloody time still. In the first half of the game, a particularly bad fall will often lead you back to this exact spot. And I fell over and over and over again, so it became like a second home to me. Though, I did hate being in the second home, and kept trying to leave the second home only to find myself back there anyway. So maybe it was more like a fly scrambling away from a spider web in a tumble dryer only to be caught up again on the very next rotation than it was like a second home. But I was there a lot. It's a game so frustrating that at a certain point my emotions shifted from anger to sadness and then to disbelief. Each fall would lead to me letting go of the controls and sitting still for a minute like a mime attempting to portray a ventriloquist. And even that feeling eventually passes, but only because the sadness and disappointment has taken over to the point where each new setback just feels like the norm. You know, my second fall doubled my failure rate, but my 1000th, that was just a single blade of grass in a meadow of despair. It's like a pigeon shitting on you after you've already fallen into a sewer, or seeing Piers Morgan on TV, again. But even though you'll tumble relentlessly, the same falls become less of an issue as you practice getting back to the same spot and find yourself doing it faster and faster. It's a great feeling to have a climb that once took you an hour now take you 2 minutes. It's like the Benjamin Button version of a sex life, where you finish faster and faster as you approach your virginity. That is except for a few obstacles. A few of them are more like the opposite of my sex life when I was on antidepressants, in that no matter what you try or how many times you try it, they remain hard. When you're climbing something new, you'll constantly feel on edge. When I wasn't falling, I was almost falling, desperately trying to cling on. It's an incredibly tense experience, and that stems almost entirely from the steep difficulty. Don't let that put you off though. There are certain things that can make people dismiss a game outright when they really shouldn't. For example, in 2005 a game released called 50 Cent Bulletproof. In May of the year 2000, 50 Cent was sat in the back of a friend's car when he was shot 9 times from close range with a 9mm handgun. Thankfully, he somehow survived this attack, and after a hospital stay in 5 months, he was fully recovered. That's truly impressive. But I don't know about you, but if I was wearing a vest and that vest was shot, if the bullet travelled straight through that vest and into my body, leaving me bleeding on the floor, I would not consider that particular vest bulletproof. Even if it did manage to make a full recovery after 5 painstaking months of physiotherapy. I've never been shot, but I imagine I wouldn't take to it well. However, 50 Cent has multiple times and is one of a small percentage of people who is demonstrably not bulletproof. So calling his game bulletproof is ridiculous. It's like if Abu Hamza brought out a game called All Hands on Deck. Now, during that some of you may have been thinking, well Salad, that's all well and good. Traditionally bulletproof does mean cannot be penetrated by bullets. But nowadays it has a second, informal definition of safe from failure, so 50 Cent could have been using it in that way. Well, I thought that might be the case as well, so I wrote to him just to make sure, not particularly expecting a response, but he actually did get back to me the other day. Here's what he had to say. Dear Salad, thank you for your letter. I would like to clarify that I was not using bulletproof in an informal way. I never use informal language or slang. I see informal language and slang as the enemy. In fact, I hate informal language and slang. I truly detest it. Yours sincerely, Fiddy. So that settles that. Because of the confusing name, you'd be forgiven for writing off 50 Cent Bulletproof, assuming it was a game where the main character couldn't take any damage and so one which would pose no challenge. But you shouldn't have done that. No, you should have written it off because it was a massive piece of shit. Anyway, in Getting Over It's case, people may write it off because of the genre it belongs to, and that would be a shame. It was obviously designed to be one of those difficult rage games, you know the ones, and it definitely achieves that. But it isn't a buggy mess, it isn't unfair, and it doesn't have unresponsive, terrible controls, seemingly some of the genre's other main staples at this point. If you're looking for a rage game which doesn't feel unfinished or made purely as a lazy joke, this might be it. In most of Bennett Foddy's games, he seems interested in weird and awkward control schemes, but they're always responsive and work as intended. Take QWOP for example. The controls are difficult to get used to, but they're not broken. The buttons always do the same thing, it's not a mistake, and it's not buggy. QWOP's movement controls probably wouldn't work very well in Dear Esther, but they're what makes QWOP unique. There would be no point to it if you could just hold right. That's true here too, the controls aren't terrible, but they are difficult. It requires finesse and patience, despite the fact you're using only a sledgehammer. It's like trying to pull in someone drowning in shark-infested waters with a rope made out of entrails, or riffraff giving a blowjob. The tools aren't the best, admittedly, but that's precisely why you have to be careful. In fact, just playing the game shows you that Bennett is passionate about it. He often talks to you as you climb with topics such as his inspirations, his goals when designing a section, or what he thinks a good game should be. I found it very interesting and it seems sincere, but even if you don't find it interesting, it serves a brilliant second purpose. As well as when you climb, Bennett will speak to you when you fall, offering up an inspirational quote or a message of sympathy. If this was the only time he spoke, it would just seem like what it is, sarcastic mockery. But because it's sandwiched between these from-the-heart speeches, they can sometimes almost seem sincere, and that's worse. It goes from mocking to patronising. It's the most anger-inducing thing he could have done, and it's great. Imagine your partner was in a robot-themed outdoor dance trio, and one day, while they were busking on the street, the weather turned sour, there was an absolute downpour, and during their performance, your partner was struck by lightning and died. Now, someone mocking their death would obviously be incredibly hurtful, but perhaps not as much as someone well-meaning making light of your sadness with an unneeded inspirational quote. You know, those meaningless platitudes seemingly designed to avoid having an actual conversation about uncomfortable topics. Something like, I don't know, life is not about waiting for the storm to pass, but learning to dance in the rain. They're trying to be helpful, but it's somehow worse than if they were just mean-spirited. That's this game. The mountain can at points seem like just a random collection of objects, and maybe it is, but at least that's better than the whole thing looking like a boring, brown, well, mountain. It also shows just how much harder climbing is when you're using a pot and hammer, because even a bloody child got this high. The game is incredibly short in one sense, with the distance between the start and finish being quite small, and with not all that many sets of obstacles to get through. But that doesn't feel like an issue for two main reasons. Too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. You know, one hamster rolling in a ball is cute, people tend to like that. But 1,000 hamsters in a Zorb? People seem to like that less. Getting Over It doesn't outstay its welcome. This isn't Skyrim, and it isn't trying to be. It does one thing, and it does it well. I would have liked some more moving parts, but other than that, it explores most of what it can with its premise, and I'm glad it doesn't try to be longer and end up repeating the same types of challenges over and over again. The second reason is that even though there aren't all that many obstacles, and the game can be beaten in 3 minutes, it took me over 10 hours. It's that difficult. It's crazy to think of someone being just that much better than you. Watching a speedrun of the game felt like I was a tapeworm looking at Keemstar, an eagle looking at a jet fighter, or Piers Morgan looking at a man covered in raw sewage and pigeon shit. All jokes aside, just completing the game at all feels like an accomplishment, and it was definitely worth my time. It also helps that the reward at the top of the mountain is well worth the struggle to get there. But trust me, you'll only ruin its impact if you look it up, so go play the game.